in the environment we've seen over the past few years, where there've been certainly macro uncertainty, a bit of a K-shaped recovery, you've still somewhat seen low single-digit type increases in gaming revenues. Consumers generally want to go have fun, let off some steam, and go to a casino. And I think that shows with how we look at our gaming REITs.
Hello and welcome to the REIT Report. I'm your host, Sarah Borson-Keto. In today's episode, we're taking our monthly look at a REIT sector. For August, that's gaming, and with me to share his insights is Barry Jonas, Managing Director at Truist Securities. Barry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, Barry, for those who are not familiar with the sector, how do gaming REITs compare structurally with other REIT sectors, and particularly with net lease REITs?
Sure. As you said, it's a triple net lease, been around for about 10, 15 years now. Penn National Gaming split into two companies, GLPI as the PropCo, and it remained as an OpCo. And we've really had a limited number of companies in this space really specializing on gaming or casino assets. Very specialized, very regulated, very gruesome process to get approvals. A lot of these deals will take a year. I think when the sector first emerged, it was seen as an orphan and really misunderstood. But as time has moved on, we are really seeing buy-in from the REIT community. And I think investors understand this as a very safe, durable stream of rent that has tenants who are sizable. Most of them are public, audited, and have at this point not seen any major defaults or lack of payments made. So it's a very safe, secure rental stream, but somewhat niche-y, I would say, for the overall REIT community.
And you touched on this, but gaming REITs are often viewed as having some of the most resilient cash flows in commercial real estate. What would you say you're seeing today in terms of tenant performance, rent coverage, and also consumer spending?
Sure. So I think if you go back to 2008 and look at the Great Recession and look at that for a sensitivity to economic cycles, and then look at COVID as well, gaming really survived and in some cases flourished as we exited those. Peak to trough earnings for regional gaming, that's non-destination, just earnings, is only sort of like mid-teens declines during the Great Recession. If you think about COVID, casinos closed for 3-4 months. REITs got paid in that time. And then casinos were amongst the first businesses to open as we were emerging from COVID. So fairly sticky, fairly safe. People enjoy gaming and treat it somewhat like a country club. Even in the environment we've seen over the past few years, where there've been certainly macro uncertainty, a bit of a K-shaped recovery, you've still somewhat seen low single-digit type increases in gaming revenues. Consumers generally want to go have fun, let off some steam, and go to a casino. And I think that shows with how we look at our gaming REITs.
And can you just touch a bit on the geographic spread of the assets, where the bulk of portfolios are located?
Sure. So casinos are spread throughout the United States. There are a handful of exception states like Texas, Alabama, but even those states will have some tribal casinos. Now, tribal, a tricky subject, but you're generally not able to sell leaseback that, at least not traditionally. So from a commercial casino perspective, I would say the bulk of gaming and leisure properties portfolio are in markets spread throughout the United States and somewhat minimal in Las Vegas. And then Vici, that is the larger of the two gaming REITs, and they have a sizable exposure to the Las Vegas Strip, but they also have meaningful exposure to the regional gaming markets. Again, if you think back to 50 years ago, if you wanted to gamble in the United States, you were going to Las Vegas or Atlantic City. Today, most places in the United States, you can drive within 60 minutes and be at a slot machine or at a table game. And at this point, we think roughly half of the commercial gaming properties out there have sale leasebacked their properties primarily to VICI and GLPI.
And just hopping back to talk about fundamentals, as you look ahead, how confident are you that those fundamentals will have sustainability?
I think we've seen very stable growth. Certainly, nothing is recession proof. I think maybe many years ago it was thought that these businesses were proof, but they're obviously not. But they are more resistant than other businesses. People generally want that experiential element of going out, seeing their friends, playing, gambling, doing some of the other non-gaming amenities at these properties. The bulk of regional gaming facilities earn their revenues from the casino. In Las Vegas, it's a little different. It's about a third gaming and 2/3 non-gaming, whether that's the hotel or other amenities. So the gaming pure businesses, the gaming centric businesses, I think have been incredibly stable, up low single, at worst down low single digits, outside of the Great Recession, that is. But whether it's folks wanting to stay closer to home, do more of a staycation and just frequent their local casino for a night out as opposed to going to on an expensive vacation elsewhere, these businesses just seem to keep on ticking and put up generally stable earnings. And I would say that we're past the point of sizable growth. If you think back to the evolution of two jurisdictions in the United States that today, there was sizable periods of growth, the advent of riverboat gaming. Just today, we're somewhat saturated in the United States. So the businesses somewhat mirror local GDP growth overall. There's select growth every now and then. New York is now seeing casinos pop up in the downstate area. There's always talk about maybe Texas at some point, though nothing imminent. But for the most part, we are saturated and casinos grow in line with GDP, employment, general macro factors. Now, the only other thing I would add is that while casinos do sort of run high end, lower end, that doesn't necessarily correlate with the way the database of like a Walmart or a Target would. Our low end very well could be you or me if we just don't have a big proclivity to spend a lot of our disposable income on gambling. But overall, the database here is probably healthier than you might find in a wider demographic pool of the US in general.
And Barry, can you touch on what you've been seeing in terms of transactions and what makes a compelling transaction today?
Sure. So look, years ago, you would see sizable sale leasebacks of large portfolios. Today, I think we're in a much different environment. Interest rates are obviously not what they were 5 years ago. We're seeing small deals, add-on deals. We've seen a lot more non-gaming deals done, especially by VICI, where they'll look to more experiential, whether it's golf courses, general hotels, bowling alleys. And I think they're a lot more selective. Part of that is just naturally cap rates aren't what they were when the 10-year was in the 2% range. But there's an element of the bid ask, which has made deals harder and harder. Expectations around valuation may be anchored to deals that were done a few years ago. And consequently, we've been in an environment where there just aren't any sizable portfolio deals announced. M&A is making its way through the sector right now. So we're seeing Caesars in a proposed takeout from Fertitta Enterprises. We're seeing some other movement on the M&A front, and that could present opportunities for companies like VICI and GLPI, given their current tenants who may have to sell off some properties to get transactions to close, just from a concentration and FTC perspective.
And can you also touch on the appeal to institutional investors versus generalist investors? Are you seeing growing interest among generalists for the sector?
I think right now we're at a weird point where valuations have come in for VICI. So some of the growthier, like more high profile acquisitions they've done in the past, lower cap rate, it's harder for them to do. I'd say we've also seen an evolution where 10 years ago, this was an orphan asset class. Now it's fairly well owned across institutions. So at times we do see use of proceeds by REIT investors here, maybe to look for sexier trades or investments. I do think that this is a core part of any REIT investor portfolio. Whether it's over or under index just depends on the view of whether the deal activity will pick up. We certainly have our share of generalists, of gaming-centric investors who look at this sector, but I think over time it's moved more to a wider and deeper REIT investor base.
And is there any evidence at this point that online gaming and sports betting are cannibalizing destination revenue?
I think that's a very topical debate. I think when you think about sports betting, that was something that, aside from Nevada, was somewhat limited. So it's a bit greenfield overall. You could look at like March Madness, when they used to be quite difficult to get a room in Las Vegas. Maybe now there's more of an ability to stay closer to home. But I think the bigger question is iGaming. That's where you can play blackjack or poker or slots on your phone. It's only in a handful of states now, nowhere near the number of states where you can do online sports betting. But I think the data certainly suggests that there is some level of cannibalization. I would think of it like if you go to a physical casino 4 times a month to see friends, just to let loose, gamble a little, you might want to go one time less because you can do it in the comfort of your home in your pajamas, especially if the weather is bad. And I think that fear has certainly limited the amount of new states legalizing iGaming. And there's always this sort of push-pull with states have budget deficits, but at the same time, there's a concern how additive will iGaming be. From a REIT perspective, I think if it's one of your tenants, then you just get more coverage at the company level. The challenge is that you've seen players like DraftKings, FanDuel, and now with this prediction market, companies like Kalshi, there's a concern that the pie gets split more ways digitally, and maybe there's some hurt to your tenants overall. But it's moving very slowly. I think it puts the onus on tenants to make their properties more experiential, nicer, have more amenities. If you just have a room full of slot machines that don't really have any great restaurants, entertainment options, I think if there's a risk of iGaming coming to your state, that certainly puts you in a less desirable position than a really nice hotel-driven, amenity-driven property that is more than just gambling per se. Now, I will just add, on the flip side, you look at states like New Jersey, where gaming is concentrated in the South and Atlantic City, and operators there have been able to reactivate players in different parts of the state, drive them to go to Atlantic City by giving them promotions, play on your phone, and hey, you've got a free room, come to the slot tournament at our property. So there's certainly strategies that can be done to keep revenue at the physical casino. If I am a state, my motivation is to keep the physical property having as much revenue as possible, irrespective of the tax element. It's just the economic benefit that offers to the state. Jobs, direct jobs, indirect jobs, dry cleaners, caterers, security guards, all that goes away if I'm coming 3 times instead of 4 times. It doesn't go away, but you could see how the state benefits more. And we do see some proposals to have a higher tax rate online versus at a physical property.
So, Barry, as you look ahead over the next few years, what do you believe will be the biggest drivers of earnings and dividend growth? And where do you see the biggest opportunities for gaming REITs?
Sure. I think the past few years, we've seen a consolidation phase in gaming. You now have a handful of larger players who control the bulk of gaming assets and properties, at least from a commercial operations perspective. We haven't seen valuation move higher. If anything, we're more at trough closer to trough levels from a valuation cycle perspective. So we're starting to see companies get taken private or other elements of M&A. I think there's a potential we see a deconsolidation phase where companies look to focus on the growthier parts of their asset, and maybe smaller underloved parts of the portfolio could do better in other people's hands who are more focused on putting CapEx in and driving maybe some love to properties which maybe fell on the wayside. So I think optimization is a focus. US is clearly saturated right now. And on a go-forward basis, I think it'll be fine-tuning portfolios and changing strategies from a marketing perspective, a player development perspective, to kind of squeeze out more earnings growth. So that's what we're on the lookout for. Internet is something which I think is an inevitability. So companies that are able to excel in that area and think of synergies, really look at the player from an omni-channel perspective, I think those will do well in the future. And international is clearly an area of focus for a subset of operators. It's been something that the REITs generally have been more limited to, a handful of deals in Canada, but that's something we're always mindful of going forward. And then the final bucket would just be non-gaming. That is an area where it's harder to find sizable deals the way you do have in gaming. Gaming is amongst the most productive real estate from an EBITDA per square footage perspective, but that doesn't mean there aren't compelling deals to be had in other areas beyond gaming for the gaming REITs.
Excellent. Barry, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform.